This was inevitable. After 16 long seasons in the NHL, former Winnipeg Jets captain Blake Wheeler has announced his retirement, leaving behind a very interesting and mixed legacy here in the city of Winnipeg. We're of course going to be talking all about Blake Wheeler's career, why he was so revered for so long in Winnipeg, and of course how it all came crashing down in the end. But before we do hop into the video, it looks like about 84.6% of people watching the videos here on Jets Digest were not subscribed to the channel. I'd highly suggest you throw a subscription. We're talking Jets all throughout the offseason. We've got lots more news to come. And of course, a subscription is the best way to make sure you're staying informed. So let's hop into the video now. Let's talk all about Blake Wheeler. Here we can see we do have the announcement put out by the NHL saying Blake Wheeler retires from the NHL after 16 seasons. He last played for the Rangers in 2024. He had 943 points in 1,172 games. We can, of course, head over to his Instagram page where he made an announcement thanking the people of Winnipeg. It'll be difficult to read here on the screen. He goes on to thank coaching staff, teammates, everyone, but I wanted to read his little passage here about the city of Winnipeg where he says, "To the city of Winnipeg and the Winnipeg Jets organization, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You embraced me and my family from day one and gave me the honor of serving as your captain. Together, we built something special. I'll never forget stepping on the ice for the whiteout for every big playoff game at home. The energy, the pride, the connection, it was unforgettable. It was more than just hockey, it was home." And yes, Blake Wheeler, this makes total sense to come from him. He was beloved in Winnipeg, especially before, let's just say, 2019, 2020 era. He was our guy. And the reason why he was so important to us Winnipeg Jets fans is because he was our guy. He did things in the ways that we liked. He was a bit more of a blue-collar player. He wasn't a flashy guy. Yet he would put up big points and was always an underrated elite player in this league. You can take a look at his stat sheet here. We're looking at it right now. Mainly, well, let's take a look at where, when his numbers when he was with Winnipeg. For the first few years after they moved here from Atlanta, he was pretty good, having 64 points in 80 games in the first season, which, I mean, considering we look at the team that we had that first year, they were not a good team. They were definitely not a good team. But despite all of that, Blake Wheeler kept playing with the Winnipeg Jets, wanting to prove himself to be a core member of this team. A lot of players were a part of the team that moved over from Atlanta. However, not many of them stayed very long term. Blake Wheeler, however, showing that not only was he an important core member of the team, but he was a core member of the team who could put up points and be a part of building this team up. A player like Andrew Ladd, for example, left in free agency in 2016 and never really got to see the fruits of how incredible this city could be during playoffs. I mean, of course, there was the year in 2014-15, but having a whiteout where your team gets swept, sure, it was fantastic. I was lucky enough to go to one of those games, and it was an amazing experience. But at the same time, it wasn't the success that Winnipeg always wanted. And Blake Wheeler was a key part of that build up to the success. Of course, you have, the key additions of players like Mark Scheifele, Patrick Laine, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, all of these young players that, the Jets, having been not one of the better teams in the league in the first, 4 or 5 years that they were here, they ended up getting to, bear the fruits of that, getting key players. And Blake Wheeler being, the guy to stick around here ended up becoming, of course, captain of the Winnipeg Jets. But before we hop into the, leadership side of things, because I think that plays more of a part in the end of this story, I want to look more at, I just want to show how good this player was for the Winnipeg Jets. This is his advanced stats chart from, 2018 is, I think, the year that this is keyed in on specifically, but you can also see a timeline of how he, produced in this league. If you've never seen one of these JFresh charts, blue's good, red's bad. If you see a number, that's his percentile in the league. But mainly, if you look at this, I mean, it's all blue. It's pretty much all blue. The only thing was he did take a little bit more penalties and was not maybe the greatest PK player, but that does not matter. He was a top-line player at the age of 30, and he was producing. He was an elite player in this league. He was great offensively, great defensively, fantastic on the power play, setting incredible goals up with Patrick Laine, Dustin Byfuglien. He was the key part that made that power play run. truly, I cannot emphasize how good this player was and how underrated he was throughout those, mid 2010 years. He was phenomenal, and one of, like, honestly, like, it was so nice to have a guy like this because he kind of represented what Winnipeg was in this league. He was a underrated player in an underrated city who was beloved by this fan base. He went to bat for this city. He said he loved it here, and how could we not love him? Like, he did everything we asked of him. He became our captain and represented this city on the national level, on the international level, if you consider it with the States, obviously. But he was fantastic, and this era of Winnipeg Jets hockey is just signals to me. I just think of Blake Wheeler and how good he was for this time, and then we can kind of look at where things started to go wrong with Blake Wheeler. Of course, if you take a look at just, his numbers, for example, they almost kind of represent, or they almost kind of, align with how things started to go poorly for him. Of course, we see our first dip in 2018-19, and that is the year where things start hitting the fan. This is the year, of course, where after unfortunately losing in 2018, a season where, many people, myself included, would say the Winnipeg Jets were the best team in the league and should have won the cup that year, unfortunately getting goalied by Marc-Andre Fleury in the Western Conference Final, and that's the year, of course, where the Caps go on to beat Vegas in the finals. After that, I think everything kind of hit Blake Wheeler in a different way. He became so focused on trying to win that it kind of became a toxic environment. We've all heard the stories about how, the locker room has had its issues, and we'll get into that. But I think where it kind of capsized is at the end of the series against St. Louis. And we can take a look here at the quote after that series ends. Unfortunately, this is the year where the St. Louis Blues come back and beat the Winnipeg Jets in the first round and go on to win the cup. When Blake Wheeler was asked what went wrong at the end of the game, clearly he had a lot of emotions. He goes on to say, fuck off. Please, come on, man. This is a tough trophy to win. Maybe our best just wasn't good enough today, and their best was pretty darn good. So this is a quote where you can kind of start to see the frustration and anger that Blake Wheeler is dealing with start to set in. And at this point is where we start to see a bit of the downfall of the Winnipeg Jets. This is where we get, of course, Dustin Byfuglien leaves the team not long after this. Patrik Laine gets traded, which we'll talk about, Blake Wheeler's involvement with that. Among many other things, you can even point to, there was a quote, I'll see if I have it here. Yes, I do. Kevin Hayes and Cody Eakin, these are two players that the Winnipeg Jets acquired, at trade deadlines. Of course, Kevin Hayes was in the 2019 year where they played against the Blues, and Cody Eakin was later on. They both mentioned and said that the Winnipeg Jets dressing room was the worst they had ever played in. And there aren't any exact quotes that go on to say, specifically from Dustin Byfuglien that, like, Blake Wheeler was the reason that he left or anything like that. However, I've heard rumors that there were some pretty heated arguments in the dressing room, and that could have probably led to, of course, Dustin Byfuglien not wanting to play hockey anymore. And we can even move on to talk about the departure of Patrik Laine, which, of course, had to do a little bit with Blake Wheeler, considering the fact that, and this is pretty well documented, that Blake Wheeler was a little bit worried about his spot in the lineup and saw Laine as a bit of a threat to that. On top of that, there was the way that the locker room was managed, having Paul Maurice not really having too much of a say in it, letting Blake Wheeler take control. But either way, we'll get into that. We can talk here and go over to this newspaper from Finland, where a reporter had, spoken with Patrik Laine and some insiders to see a little bit more into the story. And these quotes were taken out of it. He says, Wheeler and Scheifele threw sand at Laine's skates in almost every possible way outside the rink. Wheeler in particular was a master at saying things behind the young Finnish player's back that he certainly didn't want to be made public. Jets head coach Paul Maurice was too weak to challenge Wheeler and Scheifele. Maurice let Wheeler and Scheifele lead the team and continued to let them. This gang of three made life difficult for Laine, who was dissatisfied with his role and his treatment. And even further to that, talking about the press conference where, Blake Wheeler spoke on the departure of Patrik Laine. He had this to say. He went on to say, maybe I could have communicated a little bit better instead of getting frustrated. And at this point in his career, he was just trying to win. He took that pressure. There was a ton of pressure on him to win a Stanley Cup after everything went bad in 2018, and he unfortunately took his frustration out on the team as well as on the on of course Patrik Laine. But and then this continues on. Of course, the pandemic happens. There are the issues with mental health that go along with that, and then of course the Winnipeg Jets end up getting a new coach in Rick Bowness, who goes on to strip Blake Wheeler of the captaincy. And in this article here on Sportsnet, it's a very interesting article and a very interesting read about Blake Wheeler talking about losing his captaincy. He goes on to say things like, I felt humiliated and embarrassed when I would step onto the ice, and he felt like everyone was looking at him differently because he didn't have that C on his chest. And then even further to that, he goes on to say that he was having panic attacks before games, and that he was in a really bad place. And, this is where, we come back to the humanity of the situation, because Blake Wheeler was a great guy. And with all of the things that have been said, I think he's never been fully super honest with, with the way certain things went, especially inside the locker room. I don't think we'll ever really learn fully how things went, nor that if we did, it would be fully true, because, everyone has their own version of the truth. So it was very, very interesting to see, the way that he spoke about this. And then we can even move on to, now present day, after leaving the Winnipeg Jets after this 1 year of not being the captain. Of course, the captaincy getting pushed over to Adam Lowry, which, by the way, I think he's done a great job, of course. He plays with New York and then calls her quits. And the most recent time that we've seen Blake Wheeler is on the Sportsnet panel. This past year, this past playoffs, we all saw him being an analyst here, a guest analyst with the Sportsnet panel during Hockey Night in Canada. I guess it wouldn't be Hockey Night in Canada. It would have just been the Stanley Cup playoffs. I really hope that we get to see Blake Wheeler here, because I do think that he has a lot of insight into the game. And I also think that he's kind of got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. What we saw in this, his first little stint here as a analyst on the desk, was your standard player just trying to, dipping his toes in the water, not trying to say anything too out of tune, but also at the same time trying to provide some insight. But you know what I would really love? I would love for Blake Wheeler to hop back on this panel and become a regular mainstay. And you know what? The only way I would want that to happen is if he comes in here and he acts like a personality. If he acts like the guy I know he is, with some swagger, a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I would love to see him be the guy who gets to challenge Kevin Bieksa, being like, oh yeah, you're talking about offensive prowess, this really nice move. How many goals did you score in the league? Like, I would love for him to become that guy and, provide a little bit more personality to these panels, because, despite the fact that, they're pretty decent, we get some good news out of it. They don't hold a flame to the stuff we see in basketball, for example. Because those guys like to have fun and like to throw shots at each other. And I really think that once, Blake gets settled here, if he wants to do this for, another career option, after retirement, I think that he could definitely excel in it, and I would love to see it. But regardless, that's my diatribe today on Blake Wheeler. I have a question for you all. Do you think the Winnipeg Jets should retire number 26 in honor of Blake Wheeler? How do you feel about Blake Wheeler's tenure here? Of course, the most recent feelings are always going to feel the hardest, but I want you to try and remember the days where we all went, God, I love Blake Wheeler. I'm so happy he's part of our team. And yeah, anyways, that's it for me today. Make sure you throw a like on the video, hit subscribe, have a great day, enjoy the rest of your summer, and I'll see you guys in the next one.